Welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. Join me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, for real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal, how to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and masculine, you learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
Together, working at a practical level, you learn to trust that everything that is happening is for you, your growth, and ultimate freedom.
Our circumstances don't matter. It's only how we relate to them that does.
Get ready to befriend the wisdom of your body and the power of your mind.
Break Free and Trust starts now.
Hey, welcome to Break Free and Trust, Redesign for Living. I'm Chris.
And I'm Jacqueline.
So Jacqueline and I have come to understand that what we have ultimately been yearning for our entire lives is peace with ourselves and peace with our fellows. However, without conscious awareness of this understanding, I admit I myself have spent much of my life unwittingly moved myself away from peace and not towards it, until more recently anyways. In this episode, we're going to discuss how our fear-based conditioning gets in the way of our ultimate desire for peace, as it is constantly leading us into conflict with everyone and everything around us. With our need to control, our resentments, our judgments, our intolerance, and self-righteousness being the enemies of peace. What is peace? How does it manifest and how does it feel? What gets in the way of living in peace and how do we move past it? And when you find peace, how do you hold on to it? This and much more in the next hour. And once again, this is a live show. So for our live viewers, please throw the questions into the chat or call at 1-800-930-2819 and we'll be taking those questions in the second half of the show.
Thanks, Chris. So one thing about your intro that just actually strikes me before we start is this idea of once you find peace, how do you hold on to it? And I think the answer to that is you don't hold on to anything. And I just wanted to qualify that because I had a reaction to that is once you find peace, how do we continue to foster it? I think the attempt to hold on to it actually leads to a lack of peace. So that's something we can come back to at the end of this. But when we speak about peace in general, what are we actually talking about?
That was the hard question right out of the gate, the definition.
Wow.
Yeah. It's one of those, listen, I'll speak in terms of my own experience where peace, I can describe it as a state of being. And it's easier to describe the attributes of it than to describe it directly for me. A state of peace is not being in conflict, not being in resentment, not needing to control things, not minding what happens next, not being in judgment, maybe being in a state of flow. And from a felt experience, that's sort of an intellectualization of it. And from a felt experience, it's this feeling that I'm right where I need to be. This feeling of serenity, that nothing needs to change. I don't have to do anything or get anywhere.
So I'm curious, do you think that peace, the way that you described it first in terms of the ideas around peace versus necessarily the felt experience of it, do you think that that's what peace is for everybody, where you don't need to control, where you're not in conflict? Do you think that that's a universal experience, or do you think that that's your experience?
I suspect it's a universal experience.
I'm not sure I would describe peace like that at all.
Yeah. So how would you describe it? There we go.
So that's sort of
prove me wrong.
No, I don't know that it's. I have no need to prove you wrong. Actually, I just don't know that I would use the same words as you. But maybe they bring us to the same place. I think peace very much for me lives in the felt experience, more than in any kind of intellectualization of it. probably a big topic to bring up, but I'm going to bring it up anyways. Is I think that for most of my life, I looked incredibly peaceful on the outside, but there was always a buzzing somewhere on the inside. And I'll never forget being in a community center with my kids when they were really small. And at this point, it was like probably 5, 3, and 1 running around. And this lady came up to me and said, "Oh, you're so peaceful. I just want to be like you. How do you do it?" And I remember looking at her and going, "If you had any idea what I'm actually feeling right now, you wouldn't want to be anything like me," because I didn't feel peaceful at all, actually. I think I learned how to portray peace, but underneath, there was a real lack of peace, actually. And until the last 10 years, I would say, have been huge for me in terms of my own understanding of what peace looks like. But I think that for me, peace is a lack of buzzing in my nervous system. It's an ease in my body that allows me to sit down on the couch and read a book, or sit down and learn something, or cook in the kitchen, or drive and have very little reactivity in my system. It's this ability to be really present and in whatever it is that I'm doing without any resistance to the experience or any desire to be anywhere else. And a lack of peace for me was always thinking about the next thing that I needed to be doing, or how I could be doing something better or differently than I was already doing. And I would take it one step deeper and say that what I'm really coming to understand now about peace is that I'm at peace when I feel like I'm in alignment. I'm at peace with myself, even if there's lots of chaos going on around me. If I feel like I am living what's true for me in any given moment. It's taken me a long time to get there, to understand that.
You initially describe these two aspects. There's the outer presentation of what peace looks like. I think we can all visualize that. Someone sitting cross-legged and meditating seems like an outer expression of peace, but we don't have no idea what's going on the inside. I think we talk about, I think we're really talking about here is that the state of being in peace, not necessarily the mask of peace or worry, but what is actually going on inside. And when you weren't in that place of peace, talk about now, what was going on with that buzzing in your body, but also that buzzing in your head? How would you describe it?
I think that there was always an underlying not enoughness, and not enoughness in terms of what was what I had in my life or what was being given to me by other people, but it was really a buzzing around I wasn't enough. I needed to be doing more. I needed to be better. I needed to be different. Yep. And yeah.
So what was just right there in the present moment? There needed to be more to it than that. That wasn't sufficient.
I needed to be.
Yeah, you needed it to be more, of course. You needed it to be more.
Things didn't need to change, but I needed to meet them differently. Yeah.
And did you think you were in peace then, when you look back at it, or did you know you weren't in peace? So I think this is a really interesting question for me, and I've got my own realization in it too.
Oh, I definitely thought I was at peace then. And I could definitely project onto my outer world what wasn't peaceful about what was happening out there. But I think, and I'm actually really curious to hear what you have to say about it. But I think what happens is when we're not at peace with ourselves, we end up living in such a way that we project that lack of peace or that dis-ease onto everyone around us, because it couldn't possibly be us that's creating any kind of dysfunction. It has to be the world around us, because we can't see those parts of ourselves yet that are blind spots for us, that are getting in the way of that. And so until we can, we're in reaction to the world rather than responding to whatever it is that's going on within ourselves. What was it that you wanted to say that?
It's like that. Yeah, I laugh because, again, if you asked, I was quite unconscious in thinking that, what I was either in peace or I was heading towards peace, or that's what my life was. And man, it's like it was anything but that when I look back at it. And there was, I think, what I would used to equate to what was peace is when things were happening the way I thought they should, or how I wanted them to. And this the analogy that I like to that really resonates with me about this place of peace, because I'll actually take myself to this place, like, who am I right now? Is I used to run my life like I was the director of the play. Um, I wanted to arrange the script. I wanted to arrange the timing. Everyone had their lines that I wanted them to say, the things I wanted them to do, and my place in it. And as long as everyone did the things I wanted them to do in a way I wanted them to do it, it was perfect. The show would go off just exactly how I wanted it to. And for a long time, I got the show to go off the way I wanted it to, and I thought that was peace. But that wasn't at all. What it was actually, it was just control, masking as peace. And what I was doing was not creating the environment of peace.
And
But
what would happen in that scenario? What would happen if things didn't go according to plan, or people didn't operate according to their lines or their
yeah.
rules?
And inevitably what happened, of course, just like you mentioned, then for me, it'd be like, well, what's wrong with that person? That person's not at peace. That person's not playing the role they're supposed to play. It's not me. And it was all this externalization of where things are going wrong. That was nothing to do with me. And ultimately, when things were going right, now realizing this idea of, like, obviously being the director of the show was putting myself in conflict with everybody, building resentment slowly up about people being told constantly what to do and trying to arrange everything the way I want it to be arranged.
Don't you think that we do, when we operate in our lives in that way? And I think all of us, I would imagine most of you know exactly what he's talking about, because at some point or another, we all operate on that level. Do you think that there's any awareness whatsoever in your body at that time that you're actually feeling totally out of control? Do you think there's any awareness of that blind spot in that moment?
I don't think so, particularly when it's working. I think that's the challenge of it.
Mhm.
I think it's like, I talk about this concept of our fear-based conditioning all the time, where, we have this idea of how we think life should be, and a lot of that just is to keep us safe. Here's the things I think I should have. Here's the money I should have in the bank. Here's the titles that I have. Here's the house I'm supposed to have, and I want to drive my life forward, or you want to drive your life forward to reach that point. And I think as long as things are going along, there's not that idea that we're not at peace when we're doing that. We're at the opposite of peace, as we're constantly fighting life and trying to push it forward to the way we think it should be, or the way I thought it should be. And there's a lot, for me, certainly there's a real lack of awareness, is what I was doing in that entire process was, you know, as I say, to go for, as life gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it becomes more complicated, just creating more and more complexity and more conflict in my life, which again is the opposite of what I could say was a very simple life and a simple, peaceful life.
And yet, unconsciously, what's driving that behavior is a need for peace.
100%. And that's so the conundrum here.
Well, and I mean, looking back on those parts of you, can you now, when the world when that all blows up and all of a sudden you recognize that you actually don't have control over anything, you get knocked down pretty hard, right? And your ego structures fall with you. And when I hear you and I look at the people that are operating like that in my life, even when I operate like that in my life, there's a place where I can feel real compassion for the parts of you, the parts of me, the parts of the people around us that operate from that place, because ultimately it's not driven by the need to control.
Not at all.
It's driven by a deep desire to feel peaceful. And the only way I know how to feel peaceful, if I'm using your example, is to feel like I'm in control because I feel out of control.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So that idea, that's ultimately what we're all after, is peace, but the way we're getting there is almost maladaptive. It's like, if I can control the uncontrollable, then I'll have peace. And there may even be a moment where it feels like the control is uncontrolled, but it's not going to be long lasting. And then as things start to come out of control, the peace will all fall apart if it was ever there.
Well, the illusion falls apart because peace from that standpoint is actually, it's a place to get to. It's a place that ultimately, if I do this, then I will have peace. But peace doesn't actually exist like that. Peace comes from a state of being, not from a state of doing.
Yeah.
Right. And
in fact, there's nothing you need to do to actually have peace. It's more of a state of surrender and this idea of just simply letting go of it all and non-attachment.
except the way that we are brought up throughout our lives doesn't actually teach us how to surrender to the moment, unless we're really lucky and we grow up in a family or in a society that encourages that level of development. What we're taught is to reach, to achieve, to accomplish, to make more money, let's just say as an example, because once I've achieved a certain level of success, then I can rest, then I can have peace. And actually, each time somebody gets to that next level, that underlying buzzing is still there. It doesn't go away until we actually turn inside to figure out where that lack of peace really sits. And from my experience, especially recently, both in terms of some of the things that I'm studying and the work that I'm doing, and then what that's actually had me look at, is that lack of peace is something that really arises from childhood. And it's not, it arises in childhood, and it arises at a time where we have absolutely no awareness that sorry guys, I think you can probably put do not disturb
I'm trying.
on your phone.
There we go.
On your phone, maybe. The lack of peace that we tend to feel that sits within our nervous systems is a lack of peace that has really, really old roots that elude most of us because we don't pay any attention. And as we've said in so many other podcasts, it's those very parts of us that are driving our lives until we become aware of them. So for you, a big piece of that was around the need to control, because of a feeling of lack of control or lack of safety. For me, a huge piece of that, as I am really just learning, came from a place of I learned how to please in order to be of value and to feel a sense of worth. But if I was good enough, then my world would look okay. But that if in any way there was a lack of that, or I didn't play the part properly, there was an underlying lack of peace that sat in my system that I didn't know how to be with.
Did with that people pleasing, I think does it also have its root in safety?
It's all, I think all of it
It's
is
all the
rooted in
safety.
safety.
So what we're saying here is that there's confusion between that safety breeds peace. And if we can make ourselves, if I can make myself totally safe, finally, then I'll be at peace. And until then, there is no peace. And it's that thought process that keeps driving us to get to this place where finally all our needs are met. Everybody likes me. I'm enough. And that's when I'm going to have peace, when I'm fully safe. Is that what we're saying?
Maybe, but what's really coming up for me as you're speaking, and what came up for me actually yesterday when we were walking and talking about this a little bit, was John Welwood's work, which I spoke to on an earlier podcast. And it's a book called Perfect Love and Perfect Relationships. And it's a while now since I've read it, but what he spoke to is actually this idea that we're driven to acquire this perfect love from our parents, our friends, our partners, whatever it is. But actually, that love is something that we can only achieve by being in alignment and by connecting with, I'll use the word God, you could use the word divine, nature, universal, whatever word you want to use, flow, but that seeking that, we'll say, love, peace, in those places is something you're never actually going to truly find, because it's not something that somebody else can ever give you. And as kids, we're looking for that from our primary caregivers. But I think that what it breeds is an awareness that we can't get it unless somehow we're different than we are.
Yeah.
And so we become these people that we think we're supposed to be. And inevitably, by leaving ourselves or by betraying ourselves on some level, what we actually end up doing is constantly living in a place of buzziness, because we're not actually being who we are.
Yeah.
And I think that peace is only really achieved internally when we can surrender those masks and we can surrender the ideas of who we think we're supposed to be, and we journey home to who we are. And the process of getting there is nothing peaceful. It's actually sometimes brutal and quite painful, because we have to look at ourselves and see ourselves completely. I'll share a story really quick, and that's that recently a really dear friend of mine, a soul friend of mine, not somebody that I see every day, but somebody that I see once in a while, said to me something about, maybe you can help me if I can't remember exactly, but she said something like, there is a sadness that I experience in you that I don't know how to put my finger on, but I can feel it when I'm with you. And I felt really, I heard her. I didn't like hearing her, but I didn't defend myself, because I knew that there was something in there that was for me, because I could feel like a level of reactivity to it. And what she was calling me to was the place inside of myself that I hadn't surrendered to or hadn't fully embraced, and was calling my attention. And the place that it took me to was a place that was really uncomfortable. And at any different time in my life, it was probably a place I would have jumped right out of, or I would have defended myself or attacked her. But I very much want a life of peace. And for me, a life of peace means inner peace. It doesn't mean peace around me. I know that I have no control over what happens around me. It means I can't control my kids and what happens and what they do. It means I can't control you and what you do. I can't control what happens with my work. But where I do have a say is how much I'm in control of my own nervous system. Right.
Yeah. But you can't be at peace with those things. You can't make those things be peaceful, but you can be at peace with them. Right. So
I can be at peace inside.
That's right. Yeah.
And allow them to play out the way
right.
that they need to play out for themselves.
Yeah. And only bringing that up because I think some people say they're peaceful, but then they rail against the world around them.
Yeah.
Right. That's me. There's this combination of peace internally, but also recognizing that the outside world's beyond my control, and it's a reflection of my inner world, and needs to be peace with both.
Or it's a reflection of what I need.
Right.
And my outer world is showing up as really
That's
noisy
right.
because what I'm actually needing is to get really quiet. And it's a reflection of my own inner noise. Right. But so I think that our definition of peace, as we're speaking to it, is a definition of peace that isn't about what's going on around us. It doesn't mean that the world around us looks pretty. It doesn't mean that our boss is treating us the way that we want to be treated. It doesn't mean that our kids are treating us the way that we want to be treated. It doesn't mean that our relationships on the outside are perfect. What it means is that in the presence of all of that noise, we can surrender to the experience and be at peace inside. And that takes a lot of work. It's not something that just happens. It's something that we need to train the same way we need to train our muscles when we go to the gym.
Well, I have lots to say, but perhaps I'm going to wait till we come back from our break. See you in a minute. And we are back. When we finished off, Jacqueline just made a comment about how, finding a way to be at peace is be okay with not getting, or I think you say like our wants met from our boss not giving us our want, or
life not looking necessarily the way that we want it to.
Yeah. And what I'd add to that is that it's there's a challenge with this idea of wants to begin with, that go after peace, because our wants are actually coming from our operating system, from our conditioning, and it's those actual wants which in a large way actually lead us away from peace. Wanting the world or things to turn out a way that are different than they now can potentially be the enemy of peace, and not always. And I think when I think about peace, the default position for me is like being okay with just the way things are right now, and not necessarily being attached to a wanting to be different. And why for me, why I think it's an interesting distinction, because if I start with this premise, okay, I have wants, but they're not going to be met, and but I'll be at peace with it, maybe. But I suspect it becomes the breeding ground of resentments and judgments and anger, because there's this idea in my head that I want it to be a certain way and it's not. And my way is the right way. My belief system is the right way. It's not happening that way, but I'm going to tell myself I'm going to be at peace with it. I don't think that inner peace comes about that way. I think there's actually even bigger work there. It's dropping this idea of that the way I want it to be is necessarily the right way. I don't know what the right way is. But if I look around and ask myself, what is actually happening right now? What is? And can I just be comfortable with what is without wanting to change it? What's trying to happen for me in the moment that's away from the way I'm trying to steer everything? Can I stop fighting it? Can I stop resisting it? I think on our walk, you made this analogy the other day of being in this big inner tube, flowing down the river with the sun shining on us, right? That's that feeling of peace. The sun on me. I'm heading down this river. I'm just going to go wherever the rapids take me. I know it's a safe river. I know I'm not going to get hurt. I don't need to fight anything. That's peace. And as soon as I start thinking, well, I actually would like, I want to go a little bit over there. I want to go this way. I want to slow down. I'm going to start creating all sorts of resistance in my life.
I did make the analogy, and now that I'm listening to you, I have a question about the analogy.
Right.
Because I agree with everything that you just said from the standpoint that there's no way that we are at peace if we're wanting life to look other than it is.
Yeah, exactly
Right.
as it is.
Peace comes from this experience of accepting what is in any given moment and finding a sense of ease in ourselves with what is versus what we want life to look like. But peace is also something that doesn't necessarily mean being complacent. It doesn't mean that I don't do anything. It doesn't mean that my life looks like I'm floating down an inner tube and I'm not engaged. What it means is that when the river is taking me in a certain direction, rather than choosing to be a salmon and swim upstream, I choose to allow life to move through, to flow through, to guide me to where I'm meant to be versus to fight life. Yes?
Yeah. Yeah. Like we're on the inner tube to begin with.
Yeah.
As opposed to jumping overboard and seeing what happens. So there is some action in how to go through life. You know, it's a great point you bring up though too, is this like so much of this idea of being at peace and surrender, I think it can sound so complacent. Like, what do you mean I can't do anything? Like I'm going to starve to death. I'm not going to have a place to live if I just become apathetic. And it's not apathy. It's like this idea that there's this things are moving forward, you know, moment by moment, and there's a flow happening that's beyond my control and beyond your control. The sun's coming up, it's going down, the wind's blowing. There's a flow of this universe. And the question I ask, am I part of this or am I resisting it? And if I'm trying to rearrange it the way I want it to be, I'm probably resisting it. But if I can keep pausing and ask, what is trying to happen for me right now? And can I find my way to get in the middle of that and go with it? My life is more likely to be peaceful. It's not going to be perfect, but that's the best chance I have at it, I think.
I think your life is more likely to be in flow.
Mm-hmm.
And when we are in flow, we are more likely to be at peace. And when we're in flow, we are inherently going to meet the places in the river that are filled with rapids.
Yes.
We're going to meet the dams. We're going to meet all different places, which we then also need to surrender to and figure out how to work with.
Yeah. Sometimes we're going to be cold. Sometimes we're going to be hot. Sometimes we're going to be really, really scared. Sometimes we'll be having tons of fun. That all those things can happen within the beingness of peace. Peace isn't nothing's happening. Peace is just we're okay with everything that's happening.
Well, and you brought up a really big point, which I think is incredibly important, which is that when we operate from this idea that we need to control life or that we have control in life, we're really operating from our egos. And I say that because what I mean by that is actually we're operating as individuals who are not connected to a greater flow, which actually blocks the creative force of the creative force of the universe from being able to move through us. So we're operating in a much smaller way, and it's exhausting because we're disconnected from what's actually happening. Does that make sense?
It does. And it's like becomes this in a sense like the more you sit with it, the more I sit with it, the more I realize it's a real lack of humility for me to think that the way I think things are supposed to turn out is the correct way and it's better than what's actually trying to happen.
Yeah.
I don't believe it's true at all. I mean, I've got life lessons to prove that's not it. My thinking doesn't take me to the optimal place in the world.
I'm just reminded of a story that it was a really sweet story actually. And Richard Bach, who wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull, wrote this book called The Illusions of the Reluctant Messiah. And it's a very simple book. It's I don't know, I think you could probably read it in an hour, but there was a story at the beginning of it, and it was talking about these sea creatures that were sitting at the bottom of a river that was flowing really strongly. And they were holding on to the reeds at the bottom of the river because they were where they were supposed to
Right.
be versus actually allowing the river to carry them to where they needed to go. You said something about you have life experiences to show that when you fight life or you think that you have control over life, that it gets you to some not so great places. You want to come back to that?
Yeah. Yeah, like the practicality of it. Again, I go back to my analogy of of, you know, thinking that I was meant to be the director producing the play and not merely the actor in it. If I go back to an example of my life that really has jumped out at me recently as a prime example of where I really set my life up for conflict was back in 2002. I was living in London with my ex-wife and my daughter, and we're looking to come back to Canada. And the places we were looking were Toronto and the eastern part of Canada because that's where family was. And out of the blue, I got offered this incredible job opportunity in Vancouver, um, and presented it to my wife at the time, who didn't want to come to Vancouver, didn't know anybody here, um, didn't see employment opportunities for herself that may have existed in London where we were, Toronto, um, and just it's something that she didn't want to do. And I jumped into like the producer of the play, got the spreadsheets out, pitched the opportunity, used all forms of manipulation I could and control to really sort of corner her and get her to reluctantly agree to come to Vancouver because that would be the best thing for our family, it'd be the best thing for our bank account, and all these other things that I thought were the most important things at the time. And what I realize in hindsight now, that wasn't the path of peace. Even though it felt at the time, I'm going to get of all these rewards at the end. It was the path of conflict because what I did is I set off a resentment in someone who didn't want to go somewhere and felt forced to go in that place. And that resentment just very much likely kept building over time. And I can even admit that I then became resentful of the resentment because look at all the stuff that it came as a result of coming to Vancouver. And if I'm really honest with it, I look back now to sort of one of the many inflection points in my life where with with sort of lack of consciousness and immaturity, I set out on a road of maximum conflict, not one of peace, with with noble goals and with all the right intentions at the time, from what I understood, but really setting myself up for conflict in the future. So that's a practical example I have this idea of peace versus conflict.
You know, one of the things that I love so much about you is your ability to really look at yourself and own your shit. It's not an easy thing for most people to do. And so to be able to, I mean, that awareness that you're speaking of came from a conflict or potential conflict that you and I were having, which then brought you back to a place where you were able to actually see what you may have chosen in the past and how that might influence our future, which your self-reflexivity is it's refreshing.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it became the catalyst for this particular topic of this podcast is something actually we're in the process of going through right now, where an opportunity showing up for me in my particular business to potentially amplify an audience, but ultimately it's going to potentially require a lot more work and a lot more commitment. And if I look at it now after being Jacqueline, raising my awareness on it, that I was willfully unconscious about, I could see after having it brought to my attention that there I was at that same crossroad again, saying there's a path here that can lead to all these things, and many of them very noble, but as it stands right now, it's definitely not the path to peace. It's the path to conflict with you and maybe conflict with other family members. And it becomes very obvious right now. I've done this in the past. I see where that goes. And so when I can pause and stop, I can ask myself the question, what's the path to peace? I can at the very least say, well, it's not that path. Now can I now if I spend some time in this, if I collaborate, if I surrender to my higher power, will that path of peace emerge from this? And that's what I'm trying to do now.
So I'm going to make this really personal. um, I'm going to speak from a really personal place, is what I mean, which is, Chris had his experience through that, but I had my own, which was also very different than that, which is that so this opportunity arises for Chris, which may very well take him down multiple paths, which sound like they're aligned with his purpose. They're going to broaden his audience. They're going to allow him to have more of an impact in the world. And as his partner, I have a story, and the story is that I'm supposed to support him. I'm supposed to show up and encourage and be a cheerleader and be here to help him fulfill his purpose, which I do believe in large part I'm meant to do. But what I actually started to feel inside was this awareness of, oh, I'm playing this old story of being the good girl and doing the right thing. But inside, there's something about this opportunity that doesn't feel good and it doesn't feel right. And rather than belittling myself and chalking it up to, oh, that's your fear or that's your ego or that's your whatever, what I actually did was turn inside and listen to my body. And a huge piece of the work that I do with women is around, or people actually, not just women, is around guiding them to listen to the wisdom of their bodies. And when the body says no, to honor that no versus overriding that no because the intellect says yes. And so I found myself in one of those positions, and it went totally against the old story of being a good girl or maintaining harmony or playing the role that I think I'm meant to play. And actually, my intuition said, this isn't the way. And it created momentary conflict for us, but also not really, because what came out of it was, because I could sit in a place of honoring what was true for me and honoring the wisdom of what was true for me, what came through was not a reactive conversation, but actually a very grounded conversation that opened up possibility beyond the possibilities that were present in that moment. And I think it's really important that we understand that our minds are really powerful, but they're also really tricky. Our bodies don't operate that way. Our body's messages are actually quite clear if we listen. And sometimes our intuition can speak things that can really shake our foundation, but the intuition itself doesn't create drama. It's clarity that comes from it. It might not look like the path that we had initially thought we were meant to be on. And so my invitation or my wish for you, if you're listening, is that as you work with things that bring up conflict for you, for you to take a moment and catch your breath and settle in and be able to actually ask yourself the question, is this my intuition that's speaking? Or is this fear that's speaking? And if there's drama that's attached to what's coming up for you, I would say 9 times out of 10, that's fear. If something is clear and comes up for you, even if that clarity feels really scary, more often than not, that's intuition. And when we operate from that place, we actually don't create drama. We come back into creative flow. And that's where you and I got to.
Yeah. But it's I'm glad you like that distinction between intuition and drama. It's a hard one.
It's a really hard one.
It's practice. And I certainly didn't get it right all the time, but with more practice and more conscious connection and more somatic work on my own body and my own nervous system, becomes easier and easier, or become more aware, maybe is the word.
Well, and it's challenging because our intuition doesn't actually come from our conditioned programming. It's something that is actually guiding us towards being in alignment. And our conditioned programming is keeping us safe, but it's also keeping us out of alignment. And when we spend most of our lives operating from those conditioned programs, not from our intuition, the idea of alignment is something that eludes us because we don't really know what it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And you absolutely tend to lean more into your felt experience of situation. And I tend to lean more on probably more of an intellectual understanding, but trying to come from a place of intuition. And when in this current experience, I think you're leaning into your body to tell you something is not right here, and it needed to be brought up, despite the fact it could create conflict in the minute, in that present moment. And I think if I intellectualize what was happening with you, is you're recognizing that as you use your words, you could be the good girl and the supportive girl, but if you're honest with yourself, this is going to create resentment. Mm-hmm. Right? This is going to create resentment. And as we talked about, my piece, your piece is your responsibility, and it's an inner job. And if you're going into something and you're actively going into something that's going to create a resentment, you're responsible for that. You're responsible to address the fact that what was about to happen next, if you didn't say anything to me, is going to create a resentment. And you brought that to my awareness.
100%.
Yeah.
But and I have to say, quite honestly, that it felt really brave.
It was.
And courageous to be able to speak to that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Because it means that I'm trusting me. And I'm taking, as you speak about this one selfish act,
Mm-hmm.
I'm acting from that selfish place. Because I know that choosing not to do that is actually violating something that's more important to me than anything else, which is my own sense of inner peace.
Yeah. And I say that, and first, you're pursuing inner peace and I'm pursuing inner peace. And in this situation, when, my partner, the number most important person in my decisions, lets me know that, hey, what you're embarking on has the potential to create a resentment in me. If I'm someone who's pursuing peace, and I am, that immediately says to me that's not the right road to go on. There's no road I'm going to travel. I'm interested in traveling down that creates a resentment with my wife. It's not worth the peace.
So I think I'd qualify that a little bit. So I think it's bigger than that, and I'm not sure that that's actually true, because I think that there are some paths that you will need to walk down in your life that might create upset for me, and I think that that's okay. We're being upset is actually being in conflict, being upset. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think that inner peace is an avoidance of conflict. I think inner peace, as we're speaking about it, or the decisions that we make, ultimately, the decisions that we make need to be in alignment with who we are. And so if I spoke what I spoke and your response was, well, I need to do this because this is what rings true for me, then I would then say, you actually do need to go down this path. But I couldn't do that without first expressing what was true for me, right?
I'm gonna disagree with you in the sense that I could do that, but I would not be choosing the path of peace. So it doesn't mean that's not a path to choose, but I would suspect that it doesn't become the path of peace, because I think, this is my view, there is a path of pure peace where everyone can be in alignment without conflict with anybody. And not talking about conflict in the moment. Those conflicts in the moment, those discussions in the moment are powerful. So we can see different perspectives and see different possibilities. But from each starting point, I believe there's an infinite number of paths available, and some are far more optimal than the others. And just because one's presented itself in a certain way doesn't mean it's the path to peace. And I tend to think about it like in terms of like a way to approach it, and a way of being, is if the path is going to have resentment on it, future, like a predictable future conflict, guilt, shame, or judgment, it's just not the right path. And some of those things are quite easy to see in the moment if we're really honest with ourselves. There's probably another path that's trying to happen for me. The universe is trying to probably lead me a different way. If I'm getting signs from the people that are important in my life that this may not be the path.
Fair. But I think what I am wanting to leave our audience with is this very clear direction that regardless of what the people in our lives think we should or shouldn't be doing, regardless of whether there's reactivity from the people in our world, even if it's from our partners, there is a place inside that actually intuits and knows what path we need to be walking down, or at least what feels like the right path and what doesn't. And it's incumbent upon us as individuals to pay attention and to honor what's true for us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd say in this particular example, when I stepped into it, I could see there wasn't just my intuition, there was some ego at play too. And overall, I'm not sure what the mix is. And the easiest thing for me to do in these, or for you to do, is when that confusion shows up, the best thing to do is pause and wait, and perhaps let the universe come to you and let the universe come to me, and not react.
And that's the place that we're speaking of peace, because that's the place of surrender.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody for spending that hour with us, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. You've been listening to me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, on Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living.
Tune in every second and fourth Monday at 3 p.m. on Transformation Talk Radio for more real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal, how to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and the masculine, you will learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow, and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
For more information or to connect with us personally, visit theway-healing.com. That's theway-healing.com.